So collisions in physics are an essential part of pretty much every game you'll create, whether it's checking if bullets are hitting an enemy, or you need Mario to fall after jumping. Basically, everything you do in games you'll have to check for collisions, and you will have to program physics. I'll start with physics because physics doesn't really have a concrete example in code of how to program it. It's very much a feel thing. You can apply a force down that if the character maybe is not colliding with the floor, while not colliding with the floor, a value of negative, say, 9.8 to keep with gravity is applied to the character downwards, basically simulating realistic gravity in terms of a game. The problem with that is games aren't real. The whole point of games is that you are kind of suspending belief for a little bit. So when you're coding these forces like air resistance and falling and everything like that, it's good to keep in mind some sort of realism, or at the very least understand where it's coming from, but you don't need to make your forces realistic. Your physics do not have to be realistic. That's the best part about a game, is that it's not real. It is fake, it is arbitrary. Pretty much whatever you decide to make something is what you make it. So that's why I'm not going to go through a coding example of how to do physics and things like that. More just talk about the general idea of what you should think about going into physics, or go into while coding physics, is that you want to make sure that, yes, it seems realistic in terms of the game you are making. So a game set in space is going to have less serious of gravity, or a platformer is going to have less forceful gravity than, say, a fighter, where your falling speed doesn't affect as much as in a platformer where you need to make longer jumps and things like that. Coding physics for games is very, very much figuring it out as you go, like testing, changing some values, testing again, changing values, testing again and again, until you figure out what works for you. In terms of doing collisions, there's a very, very easy way to code collisions between two objects. So if you can imagine, say you have two characters, and you want to check if they are colliding. What you can do is you can create a circle collider, or what is basically a circle collider around them. And what you do is each of those circles have a radius. And if the distance between those two objects is less than the value of the combined radiuses, then it must be there must be a collision there. So if we program this out, if we do, say, int radius 1 is equal to 10, and int radius 2 is equal to 20, and then we have random, we'll do random is equal to we won't do random numbers. We'll do we'll create an array of ints called distances, which is equal to, say, 4 distances, or new int array distances, so 4 spots. And then what we'll do is we'll say distances 0 is equal to, we'll count down, so it'll be 50, and then I'm just going to copy and paste and edit the numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So now you have the radiuses of your objects, and then multiple values simulating basically actual distances between these objects. So now what we'll do is we'll write an if statement, or we'll write a for loop. So for int I is equal to 0, I is less than distances dot length, and I plus plus, so it increments. We will check if distances at I is less than radius 1 plus radius 2, we're just going to have it do a console.writeLine. So print out, it should print out hit. So if they are within, so if the distance between them, the two objects, is less than the radius of them, so what you have determined is about the bounds of the object, it will display hit. Otherwise, it will print miss. So what this basically says is, so in this case, the minimum distance for them to be touching, the value of the distance between them must be less than 30. Because what that's basically saying is if you have one object here, that is 10 wide, and one object here, that's 20 wide, or has a radius of 20, this is 30, which is them barely touching. Anything less than 30 is them colliding, because the radius around them intersects with each other at a certain point. So now, if we run this, we should see that it should print hit twice. Oh, wait, whoops, I'm getting an out of bounds exception. Because I added too many values. That'll do it. Now, if I save it, rerun it, it should work now. So we see it goes through and it says, okay, 50 is not less than 30 because they're about, if we want to do this relatively, these are two objects, they're about here. Okay, so they missed, they're not colliding. So 40, they're about here, still not colliding, so it still fails. Here, say this is 30, they're right next to each other, but they're not colliding. Then at 20, they're intersecting each other. And so it prints out a hit. So that's how to do a basic collision. So yes, in this case, I made these fake distances between the objects. But in terms of actually in a game, what you do is you'd take the position of each and you'd normalize, or you'd normalize it so that it's it's either an int or a float value, and then you do the same thing. You check, okay, if that distance is less than the two radiuses combined, that means they must be colliding. That's the simplest way to do collisions in terms of this will work with any programming language. It's not dependent on of any engine collision tools. Whereas some engines make it easier. So Unreal and Unity have box colliders and things like that you can check for collisions, which will just return true or false value, which you could put in here instead of this check. But this check will work with any programming language in any framework to check for collisions.